And welcome back to the PDPW Dairy Signal. I'd like to say we have a bright sunny day, but you know what? We're getting what's probably a catch-up day here in the Midwest. We're getting some rain. So another rainy, kind of gloomy day for September in Wisconsin. But as we start out today's Dairy Signal, there's a lot of things as we look at where we're headed in our industry. We're going to be going full throttle. In fact, some of us are already engaging in full throttle harvest as we're looking at corn silage that's hitting the bunkers and our cover crops that are going to be rolling onto the fields or flying on the fields. I think we're going to do aerial seeding at our farm this week. And then, of course, there's nutrients that will be moving out to the fields. A lot of activity. This is our fall push, a push in our industry. And it seems like we're anymore in the dairy sector, it's all go all year round. There's something, then we're moving full speed. So today we're going to really hunker down and we're going to talk about what matters most, what really the dairy sector is all about. That is people. And nothing is more important than people in our businesses and in our families. And we're going to talk about some of the kind of the heads up, watch outs, and taking care of our team. As we do that, we're kind of customary to think about, what have we learned in history and what was today significant for in history? And this one is meant to make some of you giggle, or if you want to eye roll, that's just fine. But a fun fact for today, that is, it's Care Bears Day. Share your care today. And this inspires giving and volunteering in a significant way. And it was introduced, this official Care Bear Day was introduced in 1983, and it was really inspired by President Theodore Roosevelt, who created, and it was created by the Morris Hutcom, the teddy bear. So that's kind of interesting. A little bit more on a serious note, going back to some of our U.S. history today being a significant day. It was in 1776 that Congress renames the nation United States of America. Wow. Talk about a handle or a name, and it had replaced its current name, which was United Colonies. So I think that's pretty significant for the U.S. Another one, in 1850, California became our 31st state in record. Never a territory. California was acquired. It's 60,000 inhabitants for statehood during the gold rush. So, it's gold, and then their hills takes us back to the mid-1800s. In 1942, a very significant happening, and I didn't know about this until I read about it. The Japanese bombed a U.S. mainland. And there was some incendiary bombs that were dropped on an Oregon state forest, the first and only air attack on the U.S. mainland in the war. I don't even remember reading about that during U.S. history. That was in 1942. Think about how terrifying that was just 80 years ago. And then a little bit lighter note, it was, and this goes to our arts and music fans, it was in 1956 that Elvis Presley had his first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. And I'm certainly going to date myself to say I remember some in my very, very early childhood, the Ed Sullivan Show. So that was kind of like the main debut for some of those early musicians. So how does this tie in? All of that history. There's some very serious things that have happened today in history. And history can be made in great ways, and it can be made and remembered in painful ways. And certainly when we talk about safety and what happens in harvest, the memories of a great harvest are quickly shadowed when we have an injury. It could be an injury that leaves you with a limp, a pain. It could be a loss of a team member, a shortening, and you lose part of your staff to, some short-term healing. But that can change everything in a blink of an eye and a split of a second. So today we're bringing to you one of our close colleagues and friends from UW Extension. We want to again thank the University of Wisconsin UW Extension system and one of our state specialists, Dr. John Shutsky, for coming here and working with us. And John, I'm a little concerned that it seems that the title, maybe you've got the wrong slide up. I'm seeing Indy drivers, airplane pilots, and baseball catchers. As we turn this over to you, I want to also, as we're going to be talking about safety, I'm going to talk about a family business, and that is Prairie Estates Genetics. That is partnered with PDPW. Actually, they're sponsoring today's Dairy Signal. They know that farm safety is important because the future of not only our businesses, and as they focus on the genetics and the seeds that we'll put into the field for the next crop, their families and the people that they work with are important. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you to remind us and to make safety stay in the forefront of our thoughts as we head into this harvest season. John Shutsky.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Shelley. And that's what I'm trying to do with the title, is change it up a little bit. The majority of the people who are watching or listening to this have probably heard talks from people like myself about ag safety and health in the past, but I want to just change it up a little bit and maybe create some different places to hang the information on, or some, like hooks on a coat rack, just so that you've got some places to put this information, maybe in a little bit different way as you think about things in the future. Shelley, I also wanted to just note, you were talking about some of the trivia and things that have happened in history. I had something really interesting today on this really cold September morning. It's 50 degrees this morning. I live in Cross Plains. I live right up the road from a couple dairy farms. I moved my office upstairs to an upstairs bedroom about 2 months ago so that I could get a little more sunshine. And this morning I was looking out at the edge of the woods that I can see right outside my windows, and I had a big bobcat or a lynx that walked by, and I had never seen that before, so that was kind of cool. And I'll probably remember that for quite a long time. So in Indy cars, airplane pilots, and baseball catchers. I really have like 5 big ideas today as I walk through and talk through this presentation. We're going to hopefully have a little bit of interaction. I'm going to talk about some of the new information and data that we've put out recently with the National Farm Medicine Center on farming fatalities. It remains a big issue, and also remind people that every farmer counts. This is not just about data or statistics or numbers. We're talking about people. I also want to draw this analogy when we start to talk about safety, thinking about farming, and some of the analogies to being a race car driver, whether you're an Indy car racer fan or NASCAR or an airplane pilot, or the other thing I want you to think about a little bit are some of the hazards that baseball catchers face when they're doing their job. I'm going to talk about 2 big tractor concerns that we still see out there in the industry: roadway collisions and also tractor overturns or tractor rollovers, filling and packing your bunker or pile. I'm going to talk a little bit about making corn silage and provide you with some links to some resources that we think will be useful. Things that you can watch on YouTube, you can watch them on your phone or some other device that you might use for getting information. And then the last thing, I initially titled this The Less Sexy Stuff, but I didn't know if I should put that in writing. I'm going to talk about some things that don't often quite make the news. They're not like people who have entanglements or end up dying as a result of farm work-related injuries, but they're things that can have really significant, severe consequences. So let's jump right in. And I would like to also invite you, I know that in the past, Shelley, is this correct? You've used Slido.
We do.
So,
John, thank you for that prompt. So they can go to their handy dandy PDPW app, and right on that app, there's all the resources and upcoming programs that we have, but on there's also Slido. They click one click into Slido, and they can engage with you. And they can be bopping their questions to you, their thoughts, and I'll share them. I'll interrupt you as it comes through. Or if they don't have the PDPW app, we will not shame them. We don't judge. But they can just go and they can download slido.com and put in my PDPW for a password.
MyPDPW, okay. Or if people are watching this after the fact and would like to weigh in, if they'd like to chat with me or just maybe send me some answers to these couple questions, they can also email me. It's my last name, Schutzke, it's like shut the door, and then SKE at wisc.edu. So my questions are, when we talk about the fall harvest season, or really looking year-round at tractors and machinery, what are some of the biggest safety challenges that you face within your operation? They could be equipment challenges, they could be people challenges, they could be questions that maybe you have about regulation, for example. And then the other question that I have is, what do you do within your operation to keep yourself and your team members safe, to reduce fatigue, and also to balance your time as a way to remain safe during this critical harvest season that we see coming up? And by the way, here in Dane County, things are beginning to roll quickly. Silage harvest actually started about a week before Labor Day. So I anticipate that once this cloudiness clears and things dry out a little bit, we're going to see a lot of activity in the field, particularly with these cool days and cool evenings. So let me just begin by talking a little bit about some work that we just published back in the month of July with the National Farm Medicine Center. We went back to 2017 and 2018, and we, I guess, reconstituted a program where we used to, in the state of Wisconsin, we used to track every single farm work-related fatality that would happen in this state during the course of a year. And if you're not in Wisconsin, most of the state extension services have similar programs. So if you're in a state like Minnesota or Michigan or Iowa or Idaho or some other, you might want to get this information, but I'm going to be specifically speaking to this in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, we saw a fairly dramatic increase in the number of fatalities. The last time we had done a full tabulation was 2006. We went back and we looked at 2017 and 2018, and you can see in 2017, we had 41 deaths related to the farm workplace. And in 2018, that number was back down to about 34. One of the reasons why this happened, why we saw this big jump, is that beginning in 2017, we began to count fatalities, fatal incidents or fatal accidents that occurred on the highway. And we know that that's an increasingly important issue, and we thought that it was important to begin tabulating those. So 41 fatalities, 34 in 2018. You can have a look here at the age of the people that were involved on the right-hand side of this slide. You can see that the largest percentage of people who were killed in the farm workplace or on a highway as a result of a collision with a farming vehicle, but the majority of those people were actually age 65 and older. And these are people that in many other industries would likely not be working actively. We can also see that from the bottom bar chart, animals, we had a lot of tree incidents where people trimming trees or making firewood, those kinds of things. In 2018, I don't think we saw any tree incidents in 2017, but the other two big ones, as I mentioned, are tractors, passenger vehicles. And if you look at years past, in addition to animals and tractors, we often see a large number of machinery-related fatalities. Just some other key points. We're only talking about farmers when we talk about farming being the most dangerous workplace in America. As an industry, we have a death rate. That's the per capita rate per 100,000 people. It's about 22 or 22.3, 22.4, depending on the year, per 100,000 people. And if you look at all other industries combined, so that would include manufacturing, construction, mining, the service industries, people like myself, I work in education as a service industry. Overall, the average workplace fatality rate is only about 7. And so we typically, we see that our rate in the agricultural industry is much higher than it is in agriculture. We also know, actually I made a mistake there, the number in general industry is 3, so the rate of all industries combined is about 7 times less than it is in agriculture. So I do have a mistake here on this slide. We also know from a big study that was done a number of years ago although repeated recently by other states. About 1 in 5 of our farms here in the Midwest has a non-fatal injury. So that's like about 19.5% of our farms have an injury that results in lost time and productivity or needs medical care, or the other criteria is something that happens where we lose consciousness. But about 80% of these 1 in 5 require some type of professional medical care and treatment. And here in a state like Wisconsin, that's a big number. We're talking between 10 and 12,000 injuries a year. So one of the points I want to make, my first bullet, is this idea that we talk a lot about data and statistics and, the rate per 100,000 workers and 10 to 20,000 or 10 to 12,000 relatively serious injuries. That's data. Those are numbers. But the really key point here is these are people. Like, these are moms and dads. These are members of the community. They're children. They might be grandparents or grandchildren. But they're not just numbers. And when these things happen, the whole community is impacted. Shelley, I think you shared a little bit with, maybe wanted to share a little bit with how your family has been impacted by this issue over the years.
Sure. Everybody has their story of farm accidents. My probably first memory of a really serious farm accident, I can think of all the near accidents. I think it's amazing that we grow up sometime on farms, but when I was about 7.5 years old, my dad came to the house and they were chopping and he was working on the blower. It had plugged and something with the side pulley, the belts and the pulley. But all I remember is he came to the house with his right hand holding his left hand, and he had taken off his index finger and cut all the way through his middle finger and broke his ring finger. And it's funny, as a 7-year-old, I very much remember, because they had talked to me about if you ever get cut really bad applying pressure, and we wrapped dish towels around his hand to slow down the bleeding, and I helped him hop in the pickup truck, and I left my baby sister that I was babysitting for, and we drove down to the field to get my mom so she could take him to the hospital. And with that, my dad, they were able to reattach his index finger and set the other 2 fingers and basically saved his hand. And he always said he kind of wondered if that index finger would have been better off if it had just been taken all the way off. I was little, but I don't remember a lot other than it being a really long healing process. And there it was just a matter of some digits. But I don't know of a farm family that doesn't have some kind of story of injury.
Yeah. And we're grateful that your dad made it. There's so many people who these things happen, and then it is a lifetime of pain and suffering. Also, the other thing about these is the potential for economic impact on the family. A couple days in the hospital can easily run a family $20,000 or $30,000, and in some cases can make a huge difference in terms of their economic survival. So I want to transition into this idea of Indy cars, airline pilots, and baseball catchers, and I want to just take us back to many years ago when I went to school at Purdue. I studied under a professor there. He's actually still at Purdue. His name is Bill Field. And Bill had me work on a project in which I investigated initially about 4,000 combine and tractor fires. And with a combine fire especially, they often happen in the fall, and they can just cause ruin, particularly if a replacement machine is not available as a lease, or maybe a dealer's got a new machine on the lot, but they're extremely expensive. And so I worked on this project to help the industry to do a better job of both preventing but also protecting if a fire were to occur. And one of the things that I was encouraged to do early on, and it didn't take a lot of prodding and encouragement because I was a big Indianapolis 500 fan. We used to go there for the May time trials, or qualifications, they called it back then. And so I went down to Indy to learn how they look at this issue of fires. And there's the same type of situation. You've got oil and fuel, and you've got a lot of heat that gets generated. And one of the things I learned at the Indy track is how amazingly seriously they take safety. I mean, there are far, far, far fewer IndyCar drivers and NASCAR drivers and just racers in general. Worldwide, there's fewer of those people who are killed or seriously injured in their profession than farmers. And I'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. The other thing is to study the airline industry. In the airline industry, we have this amazing track record. Up until just a couple of years ago, there had been about a decade where there had not been a single person who died as a result of a commercial airliner crash. And that kind of thing doesn't just happen by accident. So from these industries, we can really learn a lot. The other thing is baseball catchers. Shelley, I think I can tell you a story here. I still am. I'm a lefty, and you don't see a lot of baseball catchers who are left-handed, but I was always intrigued with being a catcher. I have no idea why. I thought they had a cool mitt, but they don't really make a lot of left-handed mitts for catchers. And then all the other protective. I would put on my left-handed glove, and I would put my dad's baseball glove over my face, and I would pretend that that was my mask, and I would have my little sisters come out and throw, to the extent that they could, fastballs at me. I was just amazed by this. And part of it was all the safety equipment. So I think that deep down, because of my interests in sports and some of these other industries, I was probably forever destined to be a safety guy. But here's some thoughts on this stuff. Here's why it kind of fits, I think. With harvest in particular, whether we're talking about chopping silage, harvesting corn, soybeans, other crops, it's a race. I mean, you know this well. We get to the month of September, we move into October. Soon, toward the end of October, or the first week or two of November, the snow starts to fly. So those couple of months in the fall are truly a race. I remember going home from college, or even when we lived in Minnesota, I would travel back to Northwest Indiana and spend time with my dad, and it was just go, 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 go. We did not stop. We did not stop to take a break. That is why preparation is crucial. That's why practice and review. If you look at the people who are doing the pit stops at a NASCAR race or an Indy 500 race, they have practiced those pit stops hundreds of times. And it isn't something that they just know how to do. They have to review. It takes a team to be able to pull these things off effectively. It takes a team to be a winner at Indy or at Daytona or Talladega. We also know that during these times, things can get really stressful. When you're working 12, 14, 16 hours a day, things can get stressful. When things get stressful, oftentimes our memory can fail us. It's just normal. It's just the way our brain works. It's the limitation we have as a human being. We're not computers. We're not like little iPhones walking around. We have a human brain. And if we make a mistake, if we forget a step, if we ignore a procedure, if we step down off of a machine to try to attempt some type of a repair or replace a part and parts are not shut down and not moving, the result can be a catastrophe. So again, just like some of these sports or being an airplane pilot, you really need to be super purposeful about thinking about safety, following procedures, reviewing with your team. And then the last thing with the catcher, like my intrigue with being a baseball catcher, if you think about it, a catcher is basically outfitted from head to toe with protective gear. And yet they're only really they're protecting against a fastball that might be thrown, 80 to 95 miles an hour, or a bat, an errant bat that gets thrown, or they accidentally get hit, or maybe like an aggressive base runner who plows them over as they try to slide into home plate. But if you think about farming and agriculture, like we've got a bazillion, we've got a number of stressors, and we've got a number of hazards. And those hazards are especially even more prevalent during this busy harvest season. So again, just some analogies here to try to tie things together just a little bit. So let me just focus here for a couple minutes on tractors and also other types of equipment. And I'm going to specifically talk about roadway fatalities and also tractor rollovers. However, I do want you to just realize quickly, there's the potential to be entangled in equipment. I'll talk a little bit about falls at the very end. Not anything like really like glamorous to talk about, but it is an issue. I showed you the picture of the fires, so you need to make sure you're thinking about fire hazards. But here today, I'm just going to focus on roadway fatalities and tractor overturns or tractor rollovers. Roadway collisions becoming quite prevalent. I think part of it is also they're getting a lot of media attention. This is actually, this was a collision that occurred, I think, just this summer in Vernon County. You can see a relatively small tractor, but you see almost total devastation. I don't believe anybody was killed in this particular injury, but the tractor is just demolished, and I'm assuming that the vehicle, that motor vehicle that collided with the tractor, probably equal level of damage. What's really important in my mind about highway collisions is that this is one of the few ag health and safety issues that crosses over into the public. You know, if we're talking about like your dad, Shelley, who had the, you know, the hand injury, or if you talk about a person who tips a tractor over, that's typically kind of isolated within the family. It's kind of their business, or at least that's how people think about it. But when you're moving a slow-moving vehicle out on a public highway, it does become a public safety and a public health issue. A couple things I want to just talk about with this. This gets a little bit in the weeds, so to speak. The obvious thing is when I'm out on a tractor or a chopper or a combine or other farm vehicle, I'm typically traveling at a low rate of speed, 15, 20, 25, maybe 30 miles an hour. And you're going to be encountering motor vehicles that are going 60, 65, 70. And so that speed differential is what's really crucial. If you talk about the difference between 60 miles per hour and 15 miles per hour, that's a 45 mile per hour differential. And in that differential, in the blink of an eye, in 1 second, we're traveling 66 feet per second. Or another way to look at that is you've got a young, maybe an inexperienced driver who's coming back from school or whatever it might be, and they look down at their cell phone for just a matter of maybe 3 or 4 seconds. In that 3 or 4 second time period, they've traveled the distance of a football field in terms of closing in on your farm machine. So that's what's really crucial. However, equally crucial is the idea that when a collision like this Vernon County incident happens, the injury happens because of a transfer of energy, because of a collision which results in a transfer of energy, and that's what hurts people. And the formula for energy, this gets maybe back to like high school or college physics, is 1/2 mass times the velocity squared. I'm not going to quiz you on this, but if you look at the mass in this formula, a loaded forage wagon weighs several tons, or a combine, or any of these larger pieces of equipment. A loaded manure spreader, you know, we're talking several tons of mass out on that highway. And so people are shocked when they see the level of damage that's done when these highway collisions happen. Also, velocity is a big deal because if I double my velocity, I'm traveling on a rural roadway, like here in Western Dane County, and I go from, say, from 30 miles per hour and I double my speed to 60 miles per hour, or I double that differential in velocity, I actually increase the amount of kinetic energy by a factor of 4. And again, it's energy that kills people. It is the energy that results in these catastrophic crashes that are so very preventable. So the question is, so what? Like, what do I do with this information? Like, John, yeah, you've given me, you know, Physics 101. A few things I want to just point out. Number one, if it is at all possible, practical, or feasible, try to minimize your exposure during low light situations. We all know, like right now, it's early weeks of September, and we all know that like now about 7:30, 8 o'clock, it's starting to get pretty dark. As we move into October and we've got daylight savings time, like it's going to get dark really early. So we all know to avoid exposure after dark. But what's really crucial is those maybe half hour to 45 minutes before the sun actually goes down. You've got a lot of glare, you've got low light conditions. And then here in Wisconsin in the fall, the other thing that's happening is you've got a lot of people that are buzzing up and down the highway. They're coming to or coming back from school, they're coming home from work. And so it also tends to be a time when you've got a lot of traffic on the highway. So like with any safety issue, the more you can like eliminate the hazard or minimize the magnitude of the hazard, that's the most preferred strategy for improving safety. And number two, I don't know if this is really correct for me to say this, but I've said this for the last 25 years, and that is to try to light yourself up like a Christmas tree. The only thing I would recommend against is you never want your work lights, your white work lights, shining backwards out the back of a machine, because that can, in fact, provide glare and blind a person. It's also not legal to do that, but to provide as much lighting as possible. What I notice here in Western Dane County with forage wagons and manure spreaders in the fall is you see the slow-moving vehicle emblems, and if you're approaching a vehicle from the front, you'll see their white headlights, but in many cases, you will not see the flashing ambers. Or if you've got the flashing amber lights on the tractor, they may not be visible, or because they might be blocked because that last trailing vehicle, whether it's a wagon or a spreader, is actually blocking the flashers. So make sure that you're clearly visible. It's almost impossible to light yourself up too much. Depending on the state that you're in, I would really strongly encourage you to check with your local state Department of Transportation requirements. I've provided the link here, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. There's a web link. You can also search Wisconsin Implements of Husbandry, and it will take you to the DOT website. I also want to just give a shout out to Cheryl Skolas, who works with me. She's the assistant director or the associate director of the UW Center for Agricultural Safety and Health. She's an expert in this area. She was very involved back in the early parts of the last decade, around 2010, 2011, 2012, in some new requirements that Wisconsin formulated. And she's also a person that you could contact, or you could contact your local county extension office. But I want to take this a little bit further, and I want to push on this a little bit. In 2017, we had I'll just call it a triple fatality. We had 3 people who ran into a combine. They ran into the side of the combine in Lake Mills, Wisconsin. They were driving a Toyota SUV. It was a Toyota RAV SUV. 3 people were killed in the SUV. The combine operator was not injured, was not harmed, or at least substantially. And in part because of events like this, the federal government back in 2016, there were a number of bills and new regulations and legislation that were passed by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And they do provide some additional requirements over and above what many of our states are now requiring. Among these are side markings and side tape made out of retro-reflective material, so that when a combine pulls out onto the highway, you may or may not see their flashers, but you'll at least see a lot of reflection back. And the other ones are turn signals and the mandates for flashing amber lights, literally on all farm equipment that's used on the highway. For those of you who do from time to time look at the PDPW Dairy's Bottom Line, I did write an article about this. It's in the July edition. It talks about some of these requirements. And what's really important about this, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of this slide, these federal requirements supersede all state requirements or state law for lighting and marking of agricultural machinery, for machinery that was manufactured after June 22nd of 2017. And yet at the same time, you may have older equipment, and you might want to think about how you might adapt some of these new federal requirements for your particular combination or configuration of equipment. You look like you're going to say something, Shelley.
Well, I just want to thank you for that plug to Dairy's Bottom Line, but I want to say thanks to John, because you've been a great resource, not only through PDPW publications, but a lot of what you've been doing with your speaking around the state. So thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks again for your collaboration.
Well, you guys are really awesome to work with, and I've especially I've enjoyed working with the other Shelley.
Yes, Shelley O'Leary on the PDPW team. So if you're not You're not familiar with the PDPW team. There, believe it or not, the world can handle more than one Shelley. We have it. It's Shelley O'Leary and Shelley Meyer. So the real talented one is Shelley O'Leary. She's a gifted writer and designer.
And Shelley, Shelley Mayer, I do want to say this because as a result of that article that appeared in July 2020, I actually had a couple people who read that article and have reached out, and they're working with us to do some upgrading. And I'm not going to name names, but in one particular case, it was an older gentleman who's a dairy farmer near Whitewater, Wisconsin. And I've got a team of students who are going to be working this semester on helping farmers that have, in particular, this older pre-2017 equipment so that they can be compliant with federal law, but also, more importantly, to make themselves brighter, more visible, and safer as they're out there on the highway. So that's a direct impact from this article.
And is there an initiative, John, that others could be tapping into? I'm sure that there's a number of farms that would be interested in resources for how they can better illuminate and have their equipment upgraded and to work towards those upgrades. Where would they go for those questions?
They certainly, this particular gentleman felt very comfortable reaching out to me. He actually reached out to a whole bunch of people, but ultimately we spent quite a bit of time on the phone. I got him connected with the students. So certainly the email that I provided at the beginning of the presentation, and I'll also give that at the end. Happy to talk with people. Always, Shelley, I encourage people to contact their local extension office. I think almost all of our county extension educators know who I am, and we can certainly share that type of information.
Awesome.
So let me talk about tractor rollovers, tractor overturns, like far and away in terms of like the leading cause of death over the last 3 or 4 decades, tractor rollovers are the thing. I mean, they're the ones that result in the most, dramatic traumatic injuries, most common cause of death. I'm just going to highlight some things. I haven't really talked about this with your viewers and listeners in the past. But before I was in Wisconsin, I worked in Minnesota for about 17 years. And even before that, so I'm getting old, but I worked for the Illinois Farm Bureau Insurance Company. And when I worked for the Illinois Farm Bureau, we bought the insurance companies in Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Alaska. I didn't get to travel to Alaska, but I got to spend a lot of time in the western part of the U.S., but also a ton of time in Illinois. And I did a bunch of investigations of tractor rollovers and tractor overturns. And I think that these things still very much hold true today. When tractors overturn and a person dies, most often it's older machinery, older equipment. You don't see a lot of the big 4-wheel drive equipment turning over. It is possible, but it's not common. In the majority of cases back in the 80s and early 90s, we saw the narrow front ends, though not always. So we're talking there like maybe an old Farmall 460 with a narrow front end, or at the time my dad retired, he had a John Deere 2-cylinder 630, so those would be examples. The other common denominator was tractors that had a bucket loader or other configuration that gave it a really high center of gravity. So anytime you've got a high profile tractor, it's at greater risk of rolling over. And then the last bullet is actually not a mistake. You would think that the people that are tipping over older tractors and dying in rollovers are the younger or the people who don't have experience. Almost universally, these were, and they tended to be men, but they tended to be men who had been, usually 55 and older, and they tended to be men who had that tractor in their family like literally forever. Like in some cases, they grew up operating that tractor. And I think the common denominator there is we become complacent. We might be out on that same hillside that we've been on 150 times in the past, and the conditions are just right. Maybe it's a dewy morning. Maybe they have an underinflated left tire and they don't realize that, or there's just some unique set of physical circumstances and that tractor tips over. The other thing that we learned in this is that when a tractor tips over backwards, it literally rotates about its rear axle. That type of incident happens in literally, it's a very short period of time, like a second or less. And I think what happens is with some of our older, experienced operators is they don't have the reaction time. And so they might have in the past been able to get their foot down on the clutch, but they get to be my age or 65 or 70 and they're not quite as quick, and that tractor goes ahead and overturns on them. Just a few things about preventing rollover fatalities. Again, just like when I talked about staying off of the highway during those low light conditions, whenever it's possible or practical, it's also really good if you can limit exposure on these older pre-rollover protective structure tractors. I have a lot of people who say, I'm not going to do that. I'm a collector. I go to fairs, I go to antique shows or swap meets. That's probably okay. I mean, that's actually a really good use for our older tractors. I'll just say this, if you're hauling a tractor to a show or to an antique exhibit, be extremely careful loading and unloading from a trailer. And then also limit or prohibit use with younger and, like I've talked about, with some of the older operators, and certainly with inexperienced workers who you may hire on the farm. Retrofit when you can. I do provide a website here. It's www.ropsr4u.org. ROPS R for you. R is just the letter R. 4 is the numeral 4. ropsr4u.org. I will say this, in tractors manufactured typically like 1962 or 1963 and newer, almost always you can find a retrofit rollover protective structure. Not always cheap. In some cases, they can be as much as in the high hundreds, if not like a couple $1,000, plus often you've got to pay installation fees. There are rebates that are possible in most states. And so this ropsr4u.org will take you to those rebates based on the state you're located. I talked a little bit about how backward rollovers happen so fast, and don't count on your reaction time because by the time, especially if you're looking behind you and that tractor begins to roll, by the time you realize it's flipping over in the backward direction, you may not be able to react quickly enough. This last bullet, I get this question, Shelley, I get this a lot from men and women who are packing a silo, and they say, like, what's the recommended maximum safe slope? And that's a really difficult one to answer because it's so variable based on the height of your load, how wide your tractor is, what your wheel spacing is, turning uphill or upslope versus downslope, and also the position of your load relative to the slope. Like when you're coming up or down a slope, you always want to try to have the heaviest part of the tractor going on the upslope side. I will tell you this, I have investigated, if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, I have investigated a number of even sideways fatalities on zero slope ground, but I've certainly seen a lot on 10 and 20% slope. When we talk about packing a bunker or a pile, we oftentimes talk about maintaining no more than a 30% ramp on a bunker or pile. That means for every 3 feet of rise, you're going to have 10 feet of horizontal distance. There's more in the information I'll talk about in just a minute. But that would be kind of an absolute maximum, and that assumes that you're on a big tractor that's got the wheels widely set out and additional ballasting and other types of measures, and that you're backing up the slope rather than going up and down in a forward direction. So we don't have time to go into this in a huge amount of detail, but filling and packing bunkers and piles, a lot of that's going on. I'm guessing a lot of that's going on today, even though it's a little bit blustery out. There's probably some of this happening as we speak. So we don't have time to go through this. I would like to just draw attention to a series of these 4 videos that were created a couple of years ago by Liz Benversi. Liz is our county extension educator. She also works a lot with dairy producers up in Brown County. The 4 videos I've highlighted here, one is about kind of like thinking about the condition, harvest and moisture levels. Another one is on equipment settings and safety. Number 3 is on the signs of proper processing, packing, and safety. And number 4 is like a little bit more after the season has passed and you begin to feed out from a bunker or from a pile. And the big risks there are obviously the potential for falls, for collapse, for avalanche, and some of the things that we know kill people each year. So I would encourage people, if you're watching this right now live, we may not be quite ready to roll with this, but we are going to link all of this material, hopefully later today, on our Ag Safety and Health Center website. That's fyi.extension.wisc.edu/agsafety. And we will make sure to put all of the safety-related content. And that includes some articles, some like written information, and it also includes the YouTube videos that you can watch. You can share it with your employees, with other people who are actively involved in your farming operation. So Shelley, I've got 12:45, and I'm just gonna hammer through these last couple of points, and I'm going to talk about the less sort of cool, sexy, dramatic stuff. Did you have any questions in terms of where I'm at right now?
Well, we have a couple of questions that have come in, John, or at least one that's come in. It's in regards to tractor safety. It reads, if you could cover just a cliff notes on how to help minimize or limit tractor fires, what type of fire extinguishers should be in the tractor, how long do these extinguishers last, and how should you check them for expiring?
So I feel like this is like a planted question. This must be one of my colleagues. I don't know, because I did all my work when I was working in
grad school. You think you don't have friends, or what's the deal?
No, so yeah, great question. How do you prevent? We know that the majority of fires happen in the engine compartment. It is not too much to go in, whether it's a chopper, tractors not so much, but it wouldn't hurt with a tractor, but certainly choppers and combines. Go into the engine compartment on a daily basis with an air compressor, or depending on the configuration, you might be able to just get by with a little broom or a shop vac, but air compressor is probably going to work. But get all the crap blown out of there. Get especially any chaff or crop material. Also in the engine compartment, if you notice any leaking oil, hydraulic fluid, any flammable liquid, you've got to make sure, don't just clean it out. You've got to remedy and figure out where that leak is coming from. Prevention-wise, that is just super critical. If you've got a rear-mounted engine compartment, increasingly common, it's also good to just check periodically. Either use your mirrors or other ways of monitoring the situation. Any appearance of smoke, smell that might indicate a hot bearing or any sort of like flaming crop residue, you've got to get that taken care of right away. Fire extinguishers, we did a ton of work. And this is where the Indy 500 thing came into play. We were really intrigued because Indy car racing uses chemicals for like liquid chemicals. It used to use one called Halon. And you see these at farm shows where people are selling, it's like probably about 3 times the size of my coffee cup, maybe a quart, and it might sell for $100, a liquid. We found that those may or may not be effective. Far and away, the most effective is the ABC dry chemical extinguisher. So many of these fires involve flammable liquids like diesel fuel or hydraulic fluid or motor oil, and you can't put water on them because you may in fact just spread the fire. And the other thing about putting water or some of the liquids onto a fire, you may have live electrical components. So the ABC dry chemical is the best. I recommend a couple of them on each machine, a 10-pounder, no less than a 10-pounder. Some of these fires get to be pretty big and out of control. I recommend 2. Number 1, you may exhaust the first one, may not be enough, and having a backup will be important. Could be that the first one doesn't quite work. It is important to check the pressure. And they all have pressure gauges and pressure dials. You might also from time to time pick the extinguisher up, turn it upside down. I know some people knock it against a tire on a combine or a tractor. That keeps the powder in there loose. It might be like caked a little bit because of vibration. But as long as they are maintaining pressure and you keep that material loose, they'll be good for between 2 and 5 years. What I do, I've got one out in my garage. It's only a 5-pounder because I don't have a combine in my garage. But what I do is I take mine to the fire department every 5 years, and they check it out. In one case, the pressure gauge was down just a little bit, and I think it was $18 to get it recharged. So your local fire department can be a really good resource. Hope that answers that. Probably more than your listener or viewer ever wanted to know about combine fires.
No, that's very, very good. And that's the kind of tips and tricks and common sense things that we want that save lives, because I'm going to let you power through here. But as you do that, I want you to be thinking about the 2 or 3 checkpoint things that we need to do today and have done before the end of the week that are going to save us lives, injuries, and equipment.
All right. So let me just, again, this is the stuff that doesn't always make the news. We know that from studies that are done, every state in the country that has ever done a really in-depth epidemiological study of farm injuries, long work hours and fatigue, it's just like, things just go off the charts, and the more hours worked per week, the more this is related. And this is particularly a problem when you've got moms and dads or grandparents that are also working off the farm. So not only are they spending that 50, 60, 70 hours on the farm, but they are maybe working a half-time job. So you've got to be really cognizant of that. Another one here, actually, I've got slides on each of these. So the long hours and fatigues, a big deal. Our natural tendency is to go all out during the fall. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we did the farm stress presentation. It was a webinar like this, but make sure you fuel yourself. You would never go out into this $500,000 combine or a $600,000 chopper and put low-grade, crappy quality fuel, but you've got to fuel yourself. It's the same thing. Also, don't underestimate the value of taking 10-minute breaks every couple of hours as a way to minimize the stress, minimize the fatigue, and then practice sleep hygiene. I don't have time, Shelley, to get into all of it. The biggest culprit on bad sleep hygiene is right here. Do not check your phone after you've gone to bed at night. Get your sleep. You've got plenty of time in the morning to get caught up on the news. So make sure you get enough sleep. Getting on and off tractors and machinery, surprisingly, a lot of the non-fatal injuries, ankles, knee ligaments, head injuries, always make sure you're maintaining 3 points of contact, getting up to and off of any piece of equipment. For older operators, especially, think about adding additional equipment, maybe an extra step or a set of handholds to make it a little bit easier and to provide people with that additional confidence getting on and off. Falls are especially common and costly among older operators. If I fall at age 75 and I break a hip, it can be a long, long road back. Speaking of, this is my dad's hired man. My dad's hired man stopped when he was 90 years old. His name was Ed. God bless Ed. He kept my dad going for so many years. This is Ed at age 90, believe it or not. But I think one of the things that's important is even with men like Ed, never assume. The farm is a potentially dangerous industrial workplace. It really is. So for all employees, even the retired farmers who come back after being 45 or 50 years of operating their own farm, don't assume that they automatically know how to operate your chopper or to help you load the silo. On the other end of the spectrum, there are a number of youth programs and youth-related resources. The big one that we are responsible for here in Extension is the Youth Tractor and Machinery Certification Program. Check in with your local county extension office for that. It's a 24-hour program, provides great information. For older workers, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, but old dogs can learn new tricks. It's just difficult in terms of how we teach them. What I found, and I was the safety specialist in Minnesota for 18 years, and I'd go home and help my dad, and I would ask Ed questions where I would try to tap his wisdom to make sure he was doing things safely. I learned things, so kind of like find ways to open up the conversation. And maybe a good way to safely do it so that people don't feel like they're being talked down to is ask them to demonstrate how they do it. Again, you may learn some technique that is really valuable. And Ed didn't get to be age 90 because he was unsafe. So in some cases, we can learn the opposite direction. The last thing is to have a reliable method for communication. I can't overemphasize this enough with people of all ages. If something does happen, I mean, God forbid, despite all this talk about safety, things do happen. I don't know, Shelley, if you remember the bumper sticker from the 1980s. It said, I can say this, right? It said, shit happens. And it does. I mean, the unexpected will occasionally happen. We will have accidents and injuries, and we'll have pandemics, but we have to be prepared. And in terms of safety, having a reliable means of communication, in the majority of cases, it's going to be your phone, but in some cases, it might be a two-way radio, but you really do need ways to keep your team really, really well connected. I'm gonna hit on your couple, like what are those key things you need to do, but I just want to emphasize, to learn more, again, I encourage you to visit our Ag Safety and Health website, fyi.extension.wisc.edu/agsafety, and people can also reach out to me directly. Here's what I would be doing. If I am not able to be out in the field today, and preferably people would have done this like in the last week or two or three, but I would probably do a walkthrough with anybody who's going to be involved in my operation. I would make a note of those things that are the highest risk that I can make a change in today. I would be checking my fire extinguisher, absolutely, by the way, like that's really crucial. But we oftentimes, when we think about safety, we think about, oh, it's about be careful or use your common sense. But that's not enough. You actually need to do a walkthrough, identify those places where people could get hurt, and then you probably need to do a little bit of prioritization and make some of those changes. The only other thing I would say, and I talked about this when I dealt with stress, and that is the importance of taking that half hour, or I'd say an hour a week, but I think if we could get a half hour, that would be good, and doing some of this planning also with your family. The more you can get things onto paper, you've got a plan for the week. What are the critical things we want to accomplish? What are the other things in the family that I need to pay attention to? Because if you're just carrying all this stuff around in your head and you're not prioritizing and you don't have a plan, we go into that autopilot mode. In some cases, that's when bad things happen. So that's two.
That is some really, really awesome stuff. John Shutsky, Dr. John Shutsky, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And, you know, as you started with, every farm matters, every person matters, small, large, purple and green, every step matters that we take on our dairies and to ensure safety. You know, and we're given gifts that sometimes we don't recognize. And I think today, as I look out the Wisconsin window, our landscape is pretty wet. And I think the whole state is getting rained on right now. And it could be perhaps that gift is to give us that wink of time to do some of the things that John reminds us to do. Check the fire extinguisher, blow out, make sure that the engine of our equipment is safe and clean, and to do those checkpoints, have some of those guards and safety features back in place. And, you know, the other thing that I think that John reminded us of last time, the single most important part of equipment to make sure that you've got it fine-tuned and well-rested is your brain. Mm-hmm. And if nothing else, God hands you the moment today that maybe you can take a half hour longer lunch, or tonight you can get to bed an hour earlier and sleep a half hour later tomorrow morning. And that we never know what we are preventing in an accident, falling asleep or just being mentally stressed or running half throttle when we're really pushing the engine to go full speed. So heed to that. Remember, you matter. And to PDPW, you matter a whole lot. Without our members and without our farmers, America not only would not be great, but there'd be no need for all the things that we do, because you're the most important. We want to thank, again, our sponsors, our partners. You can find them on PDPW Prime. Take a moment today to click through on your computer. Go to the PDPW website to PDPW Prime. Those are our exhibitors, our sponsors, our partners, our companies. and our allied industry partners that walk with you every single step of the way. They're bringing us new innovation, products, and services that we need for today's dairy industry. So PDPW Prime, we thank Prairie Estates Genetics, that family-run business, for keeping our families moving forward in the progress of genetics and seeds. And with that, Dr. John Shutsky, thank you. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Amanda from AgroAbility, really staying on this trend that people and resources are the most important. And you're going to hear how AgroAbility, I'm going to have to get that down, has resources available to keep the body able on farms. So in ways that can make it maybe easier for people that are a little bit more limited in their processes of going around their farm, to be able to continue in the industry and in the business that they love. So stay tuned to the Dairy Signal tomorrow at this time. Signing out. Have a great Wednesday, and we'll see you tomorrow.